The cavalry raid on the Apache settlement happened at dawn in the summer of 1890, when most of the warriors were away hunting. What followed was slaughter, not combat, but the systematic murder of women, children, and elderly people who had no means to defend themselves. It was a kind of violence that would later be called a massacre, though at the time, those who perpetrated it called it justice. Nahla was 19 years old, the daughter of an Apache leader named Cochise's grandson. She had been gathering water at the stream when the soldiers arrived, and she had run, fled into the canyon with nothing but the dress on her back and the desperate hope that she could escape. A soldier on horseback had caught her, had thrown her from the canyon wall, and had left her broken and bleeding on the rocks below. Certain she was dead. For 2 days, Nahla lay in the canyon, unable to move, unable to call for help, certain that death was coming. The pain was extraordinary. Her left leg was broken, her ribs were cracked, and there were deep lacerations across her body from the fall. Infection began to set in. Her fever rose. She drifted in and out of consciousness, experiencing nightmares of soldiers and the screams of her people. She was going to die in that canyon, alone and broken, far from her family and her home. Then a mountain man found her. His name was Thomas Mercer, and he was a solitary figure who lived in the high country, trapping and surviving on the margins of frontier society. He had come down into the canyon, following a mountain lion, and instead of finding the animal, he had found a young woman who appeared to be dead, or nearly so. Thomas could have walked away. He could have left her there, assuming she was Apache and therefore an enemy in the eyes of frontier settlers. But Thomas had never been much concerned with frontier attitudes. He had spent his life on the margins, respecting neither the judgment of white society nor the rigid hierarchies that governed the territory. He carefully examined Nahla, assessing her injuries with the knowledge that came from a lifetime of survival in harsh conditions. She was alive, barely, and without intervention, she would be dead within hours. Her leg was broken and infected. Her body was shutting down from the trauma and fever. Thomas made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would save her. He fashioned a stretcher from branches and cloth and carefully, painstakingly, carried Nahla up from the canyon to his cabin high in the mountains. The journey took hours, and twice he thought she would die on the way. But he pressed forward, driven by something deeper than simple compassion, a recognition that this young woman's life was worth saving, that her death would be an injustice he couldn't accept. The cabin was small and primitive, but it was clean, and Thomas had supplies, herbs and medicines gathered from the mountains, clean water, bandages. He laid Nahla on his bed, the only place in the cabin where she could rest properly, and began the long process of nursing her back from the brink of death. The fever came first, a raging, all-consuming fever that burned through her body as infection set in. Thomas kept her cool with wet cloths and forced water between her lips. He cleaned her wounds obsessively, using boiled water and herbal preparations to fight the infection. He splinted her broken leg with branches and cloth, being as gentle as possible while holding the bone in place. For a week, Nahla hovered between life and death. Thomas barely slept, sitting beside her through the nights, monitoring her breathing, adjusting her position, whispering words of encouragement in a voice that seemed to reach her even in her fevered dreams. Slowly, impossibly, the fever began to break. As Nahla's physical condition stabilized, her consciousness began to return. The first time she fully opened her eyes and saw Thomas clearly, she reached for a knife, a small blade that had been near the bed. She believed herself a prisoner, that this white man had taken her captive. "I won't hurt you," Thomas said, his voice calm and unthreatening. He backed away, giving her space. "You were left for dead in the canyon. I found you and brought you here. You've been ill for over a week. Your body needed time to heal." Nahla didn't understand all of his words. Her English was broken and limited, but she understood the meaning. She had been saved. She was not a prisoner, at least not in the way she had feared. Thomas used a combination of broken Apache words, English, and sign language to communicate with Nahla. He showed her the injury on her leg, explained what he had done to set it, and demonstrated how it was healing. He showed her the other wounds, all of them clean now, all of them mending. "You live?" Nahla asked in broken English, gesturing to the cabin. "I live," Thomas confirmed. "Alone. In the mountains. I trap. I hunt. I survive. Why? Nahla asked, her dark eyes studying him with intensity that suggested she was trying to understand his motivation. Why save me? I Apache. You not Apache. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Because your life matters, he said finally. Because you deserve to live. Because someone needs to stand against the people who left you to die. Those are enough reasons. Over the following weeks, as Nahla's body healed, something unexpected began to happen. She stopped being afraid of Thomas. He never touched her inappropriately. He never made demands of her. He simply cared for her with a consistency and gentleness that gradually eroded her distrust. Thomas taught Nahla to walk again, supporting her as she relearned how to put weight on her healing leg. He taught her English, sitting with her in the evenings and pointing to objects, saying their names and listening as she practiced pronunciation. He taught her about the plants and herbs that grew in the mountains, about which ones healed and which ones poisoned. And Nahla, slowly, began to teach Thomas about her culture. She shared stories of her people, their traditions, their connection to the land. She sang songs in Apache, songs of mourning and remembrance for the family she had lost in the raid. And Thomas listened, honoring her grief even as he worked to help her heal from it. 6 months after Thomas had found her in the canyon, Nahla's leg was fully healed. She could walk without support, could ride a horse, could care for herself. She was no longer dependent on Thomas for survival, but neither of them wanted her to leave. The realization came gradually. For Thomas, it was the moment he realized he was watching for her smile, that he arranged his day around the time they spent together, that the thought of her leaving caused him physical pain. For Nahla, it was the understanding that she felt safer in this cabin with a white man she had once feared than she had ever felt anywhere else in her life. One evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas spoke what had been growing between them. Nahla, he said, his voice careful and deliberate, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that your answer can be no without consequence. I have fallen in love with you, not because I rescued you, but because of who you are, your strength, your dignity, your capacity to survive, and still believe in goodness. I'm asking if you would consider staying here, not as a dependent or out of obligation, but as my wife, as my partner, as the woman I want to build a life with. Nahla was quiet for a long time. She had lost everything. Her family, her people, her home, her future as she had imagined it. The cavalry raid had stolen from her in ways that couldn't be restored. But sitting beside Thomas, looking out at the mountains they had come to love together, she understood that life could offer new things, new possibilities, new forms of belonging. Yes, she said simply, in English that had become increasingly fluent. Yes, I stay. Yes, I be wife. Yes, I love you. They were married in a small ceremony in the mountains, witnessed only by the wildlife and the vast landscape that had become their home. Thomas made it clear to Nahla that she was his equal, that her voice mattered in decisions about their life together, that her traditions and her culture were valued and honored, that their marriage was a partnership of equals rather than a transaction. Over the following years, Thomas and Nahla built a quiet life in the mountains. They raised horses and hunted and gathered. They welcomed other Apache people who came seeking refuge, offering sanctuary to those fleeing violence and persecution. And most importantly, they created a home where two people from different worlds had found unexpected love and genuine belonging. When other settlers discovered their marriage, there was scandal. Some called Thomas a traitor for marrying an Apache woman. Some called Nahla a savage for choosing to stay with a white man. But Thomas and Nahla had learned to ignore the judgments of people who had never experienced the kind of love that transcended cultural boundaries. Years later, when people would ask Nahla about the moment Thomas had found her in the canyon, about the moment she had realized she loved him, she would speak with the kind of clarity that comes from having faced death and chosen life. He could have left me, Nahla would say. The soldiers left me to die. My own people, they were dead. The canyon was ready to claim me. But this man, this white man who had no reason to care, he chose to save me, not because I could give him something, not because I was valuable to him in the way society measures value, but because he believed my life mattered. That belief, that simple, fierce belief in my worth, that's what saved me. That's what made me love him. She would pause, and her eyes would hold memories of both trauma and healing. Love is not about skin or culture or the world's judgment. She would continue. Love is about seeing someone at their most broken, most vulnerable, most destroyed, and choosing to believe in their worth anyway. Choosing to stand beside them. Choosing to build something with them despite everything working against you. That's what Thomas did for me. And that's why I chose to love him. When Thomas died at 82, Nahla continued their work for another 15 years, creating a sanctuary in the mountains for Apache people and other marginalized individuals who had nowhere else to go. She became known throughout the territory not as the Apache girl who had been left for dead, but as a woman who had learned to live fully, to love deeply, and to stand against injustice with quiet, fierce determination. On her grave, 2 inscriptions were carved, one in English, one in Apache. The English read, Thomas Mercer. She was left for dead. A mountain man gave her life. She gave him love. Together they changed the world. And in the mountains where they had lived, their cabin still stands, a monument to the possibility of love transcending the boundaries that society insists are insurmountable, to the healing power of genuine respect and partnership, and to the truth that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply believing in someone's worth when the world has written them off as disposable.